This tour is the first of many that I'll be doing with just the wonderful people that I've been meeting within the Rome community. And Professor Joel Chan of the University of Maryland, he's fascinating. He's got a PhD in cognitive psychology, and his current research is on human computer interaction and tool slash process assisted thinking. He's got 46 publications on his Google Scholar page, and he's also a 5 out of 5 on Rate My Professor, so nice. In this video, we're going to see the best Zettelkasten that I've seen in Rome so far. We talk about his research into how to effectively synthesize ideas and generate novel theories, as well as the work of effective knowledge work. Academics are going to love this, and really just anybody trying to think more clearly by using Rome will get a ton out of this. I know I did, and I'm certainly updating my way of using Rome as a result. And here's the crazy thing. Queries don't enter into the process of any of the things that we've shown. Mechanically, all of this could be done within your first few weeks of usage. The advanced parts really just come from his way of thinking with Rome and the general process. So subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments anyone you'd like to nominate for more Rome tours. Without further ado, here you go. Awesome. So Joel, I'm so excited to talk to you about how you use Rome, because one, I've been seeing you in the Slack channel, a bunch, and on Twitter, and your enthusiasm, it's just infectious. We've ended up on a few calls, just like in mutual calls together before. And then, when I was looking into you a little bit more, I ended up seeing on your website that you do I'm quoting here, I do research and teach to understand and create generalizable configurations of people, computing, and information that augment human intelligence and creativity. And so, I mean, like that clearly has a lot of interplay with this,
Yes.
so I'm just so curious to see how you use Rome.
It's very meta.
Very meta. Very meta.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Just like Sure.
Yeah. So that was a really long statement, and I think the long and short of it is it's exactly the same mission as Rome, which is to build tools for thought. I'm trying to figure out how do we build technology that makes us better able to do creative knowledge work, and the end goal is any domain, but I'm focusing on scholarship, science, and sort of research and innovation right now. And the thing I'm focusing the most on is how do you know what problems are worth solving, and how do you, in order to know that, you have to figure out, well, what the problem is, right? Why is something hard? What have people tried in the past? What is it actually that we need to do differently? What are the core assumptions? All that requires synthesis, right? You don't need to just like read a bunch of papers and then like get a general sense of the problem. That's not enough, right? You need to build this complex, structured, rich understanding of the problem space. And on that foundation, then you can actually do creative knowledge work. That's what Andy is doing, right? Andy Matuszak, like his Evergreen notes, that's what he's doing. He's trying to work through what is the problem, like what am I actually doing, and what are the actual vectors of new progress. That's really hard, very, very hard work. And it's not clear to me that we have tools that actually are designed to support that. We have lots of tools to make you find papers really easily. We have lots of tools to make you be productive when you're writing, but the space of tools that focus directly on that part of the process, once you've got a bunch of stuff and you want to end up with like this rich understanding, is kind of lean right now. So that's that's the space that I'm playing in. And that's where Rome sits, or at least part of the use case for Rome, right? So that's how I use Rome, right? Lots of people use Rome for task management, space repetition, general knowledge management, I'm most interested in the original use case that was described in the white paper, which is how do we get people to synthesize knowledge together so that we're not all in our silos. And then we have this kind of growing repository of usable synthesized knowledge that people can use as a foundation to do good knowledge work moving forward. So
That's so
that's where I'm coming from.
That's so interesting. And I mean, I'd say that that's absolutely been like my main use case. My main use case for Rome as well, because like in my work, I'm always working on a whole bunch of different projects. It's all very interrelated with like behavioral science and how game design works. And those are infamously complex subjects of tons and tons of interactions between components. You know, so I'm really curious how you do that, in Rome. And, you know, if there's anything else that you want to show, you know, like I'm curious about that as well. You know your database much better than I know your database, of course.
So the end goal, is to have more of these, kind of the same as Andy. More, he calls them evergreen notes. You can call them Zettels, you can call them whatever, right? To have these, basically these building blocks that I can construct bigger theories or problem formulations from. So one example of an output is, I'm working on a paper right now, this one, right? What are the requirements, technical requirements for a system that supports synthesis? Okay, and this was the initial crack I took at it, right? I'm writing like the normal way, right? I have these like paragraphs and then I cite these sources, and it wasn't quite working out. And I started to feel I need more of these, like it's too big. I can't like think at this level. I need to break it down. I need to follow down the leads and then kind of bottom up in addition to top down. So you can see here it starts to kind of break apart. I don't know if that's visible. I'm gonna make it slightly larger. So I begin to break down into sort of there's 3 requirements I'm thinking of in terms of a system for synthesis. And then I start to say, okay, well, this is not enough. Like this is just like a statement here, and there's not enough behind it. And so I need to start to break this apart into evergreen notes. For example, scholars constantly need to reread during a literature review. That's a thing, right? That's like an interesting observation. What does that mean? Well, there's a model on scholarly primitives, for example. So the end goal is to build out these Z's. So my convention is, if it's an evergreen note, it starts with a prefix Z colon. It kind of works similarly like namespaces, I guess, because I autocomplete by starting like this. Like I do, and that's all the Zettels. So if I just do like synthesis, there's just too many things. But if I do Z synthesis, then I've got the Zettels.
Yeah, I love that little trick. I've seen people do something similar to that for projects. You know, like they'll put a P at the beginning of each of their projects, so that way when they're just typing in a double bracket, they can pull it up really easily, really quickly. Something else I'm noticing about this is that each of these Z's, each of these Zettels, they're very small pages, or at least the ones that you've shown so far. Can you describe kind of like why it is that they're so concise, what that allows you to do?
I will defer to Andy's descriptions, right? So there's a few different places where you can think about this. One place that's described well is Andy's notes about the requirements for evergreen notes. They have to be atomic. That's the same as the how to take smart notes Zettelkasten idea, right? Why do you need it to be compact? Well, the answer is if it's too complex, it's less reusable. You can't
Mm.
remix it. You can't recontextualize it and combine it with other things, right? It's the atomicity is super important for enabling their creativity because if it's too big and complex, you can't break it apart, and then you can't find it in different contexts. You can't sort of reapply things. It sort of makes it less alive and frozen. So in Rome, though, you can kind of get some of that effect even if you have a large page because all the blocks are remixable.
Right.
But then you have to have the discipline of making sure each block is self-contained and able to be remixed, and that's hard, right? So the idea is that Andy talks about an API, API-able titles, right? The if you're each individual Zettel is concept-oriented and the titles are API-like in that they can see all of my Zettel titles tend to be these kinds of statements, right? That you can think about them as like when you read like a review paper or a literature review section in a paper, these are kind of citation statements, right? These are claims that you can remix and say, because scholarly primitives models partially model synthesis, we need to do X. Or because synthesis is bringing a new whole lot of component parts, you know, we need to do a better job of figuring out what the parts are, right? And following the convention from Andy as well, instead of having separate, let me see, link statements. There we go. There we go. Yeah. So for example, there's a claim that scholarly synthesis is a form of argumentation. And then I'm able to then say a problem statement is an argument about why a particular research direction is worth pursuing. This is similar to the idea that effective problem formulation is necessary for impactful research, right? So you can see how, like, because these are more self-contained and atomic, I can compose them more easily. And it's also easier for me to flesh them out with context. Like, here's a screenshot. Here's the basis for this idea. One basis, this paper, right? So that's kind of the structure of each Zettel, right? And again, the end goal is to have as many of these as are helpful, and then when I go to write the larger things, then I go through these and compose and pull bits and pieces. So it's kind of similar to how you've seen some other like Nat's videos and these demos of, you've got the individual sources and then you're pulling them in as you're writing your article. This is a one step up from that because I'm not pulling from the highlights or the actual content of other articles. I'm pulling from my process thoughts. These are my thoughts. Each of these titles is something I've thought about that comes from somewhere. But this is what I'm trying to use to construct my new ideas.
Okay, so I'm curious about a couple things in here. One is, okay, so eventually I imagine you're going to have a lot of Zettels. For now, maybe you have 100 or sub 100. I don't know how many you have, but like eventually maybe there might be hundreds and hundreds of them. So at that point, it's still going to be challenging to combine things together. So I'm curious. So I'm curious if you've considered using like complex page names for this, so that way you're able to find those things more easily. So for example, tagging synthesis within that page name, so that way you're able to filter your Zettels themselves. And then I'm also curious, and this is unrelated to the Zettel idea, but more just something that I think a lot of researchers and academics will be curious about. I noticed your page name for a paper that you're citing, if you wouldn't mind describing how you go about doing that and like why you make the choices you make there.
Yeah, so ultimately I want to make it easy for me to create a normal genre scholarly product which has citations. This is a BibTeX cite key. Stian does the same thing. And I write in LaTeX, and that allows me to cite things, and I BibTeX. Why do I want each source to be its own page? Because that's part of the context for each of these building blocks, right? Like if I were to refer to this elsewhere, I want to know that it came from here so that I can figure out if it actually applies to that new context, what it actually means. And then I can pull up, oh, it's this person, oh, it was at this year. Ah, that's kind of old, right? All that kind of stuff. Actually, I'm changing my format a little bit. I'm putting this in here because when I do queries, then I can see this in the results. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
these
like
are
that.
site keys. So what I do is I've got my papers in Zotero, and anytime I add stuff that I know I want to cite, I export it with a little script, and then that produces this block. And the way that I find papers is so kind of similar to your idea of like complex page names.
Can I just point out something that I like real quick about what you just described there? That I want to make sure our viewers are able to grasp is that, like, okay, so you put the tags for this paper underneath the title as the title of the paper actually is. And what I like about that is that the site key, at a glance, it might be hard for you to actually know what that site key is referring to. It's useful for the sake of writing later, but for the sake of looking through your notes, then you want to be able to see, okay, what's the paper actually called? So indenting the tags under that for the sake of queries, I love that.
Yeah, so this is the difference, right? This is the old format, right? When I query, this query is for papers that have to do with what? What is this query? Material knowledge of ML for design. That's one of the projects. Right, this paper comes up. Actually, the BibTeX site keys are pretty good, right? So the way that Zotero does them is it mixes some keywords from the title with the first author and the year. That's actually pretty good. Like in academia, that's the genre. Is normally you see the name and the year and maybe something from the title, but this is way more helpful, right? Like this one has like nothing here, and then this one it shows up the title. Yeah, so exactly. I think I got that idea from is it Shumi?
Suomi, yeah.
Suomi, yeah. His trick for the way he formats his he calls them permanent notes, right? He nests them under that tag. So I do the same thing with my Zettels, right? So this is the head tag, and then everything else is under here. Yeah, so that when I go through my Zettelkasten, right, the description comes out easily, which is pretty awesome.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I'm a strong proponent of what essentially translates as literate programming into Rome, just like trying to write things in your own language so that way later it's easier for you to like at a glance understand it. And it's clear to me that like you're doing that in a very powerful way for yourself. You're directing your attention to the important information.
Yeah, and I mean I've got to credit the Rome community for that. Like it's just really vibrant. Like I've got a page right now called Romex because there's so many now, where I just play with different things like Anne Laura's Chrome extension, which is really powerful because one of the things that is hard about synthesis is you're grabbing all these bits and pieces, and you need to have some context behind it. So let's say I've got like a browser with like 50 tabs open for different papers, and I want to say I want to grab them and for processing later. What I actually want is to grab what was interesting about the paper, like what is the finding or what was the interesting idea. But I also want to be able to return to it, and I don't want to have the overhead of doing that like whole Zotero import thing for every single paper. And I can't associate it with that thing. So it's super nice. Let me demonstrate it really fast because I still have like this tab was basically unmanageable. So let's see, anatomy of scholarly information. This is one paper right now, right? So why was this interesting to me, right? Academic social networks have notable effects on various scholars. It's fine. We'll start with that, right? So this is her the thing here, right? And you copy paste it, and then you can put it into Rome. Let's put it in daily notes, just for fun here, right? And then you get this nice thing, right? This is basically a citation statement, right? This is something I can use. It's not a title. It's like, yeah, it's something. And then if I want to cross-check it, I can easily go back to this. And then if I want to actually use it, I'll turn it into a paper page and then make sure I audit this finding and make sure I understand it. And then once I do that, I tag it with the claim tag, because then it's now usable for my Zettels. This indicates that it's been vetted somewhat, and then I can use it. But without that, then it's just like, in my daily routine or my weekly routine, I'll go through these snippets to see if there's anything interesting for grist for Zettels, or grist that I want to turn into a reading note. So yeah, so let me, while I'm saying that really fast, right, the general flow is daily notes is where everything comes in to inputs ideas. And then the ones that are interesting enough become their own page. So all these are kind of interesting, but this was like, this one was super useful. This started out as the quote here, and then I was like, oh crap, this is super interesting. So I turned it into its own page and then put the quote in here. And then it made me think of all these things, right? There was a rich connection to other papers I knew about, and this one paper I'm working on, and it made me think of this Zettel. So it was important enough that I turned it into its own page because I wanted to reference it later. But these ones I'm not sure yet. So I'll just sit here. And then the idea is, in my processing workflow, I'll use the inputs ideas linked reference thing to just go through here and just browse, right? What are some interesting things that I've collected over the last couple of weeks? And I can filter by whatever project I'm working on at the moment, like this one, right? And then just say, oh, okay, oh, that's this really cool keynote I need to watch or whatever.
So what do you think the value is of processing your notes? Because I know that there's a lot of people who feel as though processing your inputs is tedious, it's burdensome, but it seems as though it's a part of your just general process.
That's part of that's the work, right? So that kind of goes, you get that from Andy, you get that from How to Take Smart Notes, you get that from all this research on scholarly primitive sense making, all that kind of stuff from the research land, right? It's never, I read this thing, I grab some notes, and then I'm done. That's not how it works, right? Like, if you think about it that way and think about returning to the source material or some of these ideas as wasted time, or making connections to other things as wasted time, that's a mistake, because that's actually part of the knowledge work. Right? As you're going back and saying, what does this connect to? What does this make me think of? How do I tag this? Not tag it to find it later, but tag it to say what's in it, right? What is the key idea here? What is the project that I'm thinking of that this really helps with, right? That kind of processing, that's the work. That's where the work is, right? It's not janitor work. It's knowledge work. So yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise you end up with a massive database of stuff that was only really valuable to you in the moment. You know, like every time you're going through and you're processing it, then you are cleaning it up. You are maintaining it. You are
For what?
drawing new creative connections. You know, it's great.
Yeah. So daily notes is like the inbox, right? And then you think about levels of processing. This is a key idea in the Zettelkasten world, right? You start with raw inputs like papers or books, and you take notes on them, or literature notes, and then they must graduate into Zettels, which are of various types. They could be atomic ones, and then eventually you'll construct larger ones that are like a theory, for example, that are composed of the smaller ones. And you want to keep going up the levels, and you want to get as far towards your thoughts, your novel thoughts as possible, right? If you only compose something from various quotes, that's a starting point, but you want to like get away from the source material to what is the interesting new thing that you can say on the shoulders of those giants. And this processing pipeline is part of that process, right? You have this regular I don't do it as much or as frequently as I like right now because of scheduling disruptions from coronavirus. But normally, in a given week, I have writing blocks where I'll have different kinds of tasks. Going through my daily notes, adding stuff there, turning those into reading notes, going through my reading notes and writing zettels, turning zettels into drafts of papers, right? All of these levels is represented in Rome. The last part is kind of hacky still because I haven't figured out how to export from Rome in a clean way.
Right.
But yeah, all the upstream stuff it works really well right now.
That's fantastic. This is all so cool to see. Can you just show the Zettel page one more time,
Yeah.
real quick? I want to point out something that I noticed earlier from that. One is that you're essentially, as you're creating, well, I don't know how this is happening, and if you wouldn't mind describing the process, that'd be great. But like, it seems as though you're essentially creating an index page for yourself, or a series of indices through the indentation on this long page. So I was wondering if you could describe that process a little bit.
Yeah. So this is a holdover from me trying to implement the original Zettelkasten branching structure, right? Like if it's a follow-on, then it goes underneath. If it's a new thought, then it's like that. And that was too heavy. So that's phase one. Phase two was, this is me migrating to Rome and Zettelkasten, right? All of this are thoughts that I know I have thought before, but I need to flesh them out. So some of these are ideas that I've had that I know to varying degrees are true and I can use them. So this is me brainstorming to make sure I'm covering my bases. It kind of doubles as an index right now, but I'm not necessarily sure. Like my end goal is to have something like, for this project, here are the, well, I guess it's going to be similar, right? This would be the entry point. Zettel would be, for example, this one, for example. That would be the end goal. I think I'll need something like this when I get to way more Zettels than I have right now. How many do I have right now? 62 link references, but this is filtered. Oh, it's not. Yeah, 62. So that's very small right now. I know I've got way more. And when I have way more, then I'll need a combination of clever queries. So I have that. I'm not querying yet, querying claims. I'll need a combination of clever queries, clever indices that allow me to roam through the connections, and a disciplined regular process. That's how I'll manage the growing database, because it's okay that it's large, and you want to have multiple entry points, but I want to resist the temptation to wrangle it and file everything away, because that's not necessarily generative. I will do it if it's helpful, right? If as a byproduct of processing things, it makes it easier for me to return to things, but that's not the primary goal. Primary goal is to generate new stuff. And so as a byproduct, you can, it turns out that making connections to other things makes it easier to find things. So that's really nice. But figuring out where to file something isn't necessarily generative, right? So you choose the ones the janitorial tasks that are actually intrinsically valuable to your work.
Right. I think that's a really powerful point, because I see all the time people not sure what to make metadata on, like that, like they'll, and what will end up happening is, through their writing process, they'll, every single time they make a page, they'll add like 7 different categories of metadata and tags, and at the end of the day, it's not always useful. Like it's all about just finding the ways that this is useful. So this has all been really incredible. Thank you so much for showing. One last question before we go is I'm curious, how has this changed since you were just getting started? And what do you wish that you knew about Rome as you were getting started? What advice would you be giving to new Rome users, in other words?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I actually don't regret anything. It's definitely changed a lot. Like,
Hmm.
the reason I don't regret anything is that the learning process has been very valuable to just figure out these different things. And it's really fun. I don't feel like any of it's wasted. Like, I really take to heart, like, Tiago and Andy have this idea of like, and that's in the Zettelkasten as well. Like, don't be too don't be too worried about migrating everything. Like, just
Hmm.
follow where the interest is, follow where things are happening. So I'm not worried about dumping. I've got a huge database of stuff in Evernote. Like, most of it's not in Rome. I never dumped everything into Rome. I just slowly transfer things over as it strikes my interest.
Mm.
So in that way, it's been a very nice ramp up of like kind of using Rome in the beginning. I didn't really use daily notes. I was trying to do this weird like Zettelkasten thing, and I changed the way that it works because of learning about the evergreen notes or permanent notes kind of structure. Um, and I would say if you're looking to use Rome for synthesis and for creative knowledge work, like definitely if I had started with this structure that's built off of ND and the Zettelkasten approach and the permanent notes kind of structure, that would be really helpful to start with. Um, I would say that, yeah. And then um, when you're starting out, you don't need queries as much, but they're super helpful at this point, right? So I
Hmm.
wouldn't tell myself to learn queries at the beginning
Right.
because it's not useful yet. You kind of need to feel the need for it to do it well, right? You don't want to like set up the whole query system and then like, it's actually not useful for me. You want to feel the pain and then design the query to to
Hmm.
to reduce your pain. That's my philosophy, at least. So like I would say two things like learn about the Zettelkasten thing um, and find a structure that works for you, but don't stress it.
Hmm.
Just let it grow organically. That's what Rome excels at. You don't have to impose a
Yes.
structure at the beginning. Just play with stuff, and it's easy to fix things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Would totally agree with all of that, and I think that's such great advice. I hope people are listening and taking that to heart. Uh, Basically, just like experiment, like and take and really gain from that process of learning how to use this
Mm-hmm.
better, because as you learn how to use this better, it's also going to help you experience better ways of thinking, feeling
Mm-hmm.
those pains of like, I'm trying to do this thing, I'm working on this, and
Mm-hmm.
I need something different, I need something stronger to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's such an incredible way to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's
Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joel.
Of course, this is helpful for me too. Like I said, this is my research. So helps me to think through these things. I might write a Zettel about this.